I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt Bernico, the co-host of this podcast, and also this week I'll be introducing myself as Scabby the Rat.
I'm Dean Detleroff, also the co-host of this podcast, and this week I'll introduce myself as a communist dog. Sorry, excuse me. Important to get the mammal correct.
Yeah, it is. Man, I wish there were more mascots on the left. I think that's something we could do well with if we just had a few more big blow up animals that were associated with leftist politics. I think it's good.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm gonna go down. It's almost Halloween time. I'm gonna go to Spirit Halloween, and I'm just gonna find some of the coolest, biggest inflatables and decide what political tendency they represent and put those outside my house.
All right. Well, listen, we'll talk more about Halloween costumes on the Patreon only podcast. This week we got Dan
premium
Walden.
Content.
Yeah, that's right. This week we got Dan Walden on the podcast. Dan is a PhD student at the University of Michigan, and a really cool guy who writes for Current Affairs and for The Bias. Yeah, Dean, what else can we say about Dan?
Dan is a great Twitter follow if you're looking for those, and who isn't these days. Dan writes about Christianity and socialism, but in particular how conservatives construe them, which is, not in particular, I shouldn't say. He has done some writing about those things, among other things, and that writing is very interesting and cool. He reads the bad books, so you don't have to, and I appreciate that service that I do not have the patience to provide. So in the first half of the episode, we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about Dan's reading of these wild conservatives talking about Christianity and socialism. And in the back half, we especially wanted to have Dan on the show to talk to us about the recent strike at the University of Michigan. So if you didn't know that had happened, it's over now. But at the beginning of the school year, right after Labor Day, the Graduate Employees Organization at U of M voted to strike, which was illegal. And a very big deal. And it lasted way longer than I think anybody had initially expected. They got a ton of support from other people at the university, like the residential assistants and dining hall workers and other trade unions. And it was just a huge deal, and a lot of wild stuff happened. So we'll talk first about Christianity and socialism, then we'll ask Dan about the anatomy of that strike, and we'll bring it all around at the very end to put all these pieces together.
All right, let's go to Dan. This week on the Magnificast, we're joined by Dan Walden. Dan, welcome to the show. Whenever we have a guest, we always ask them to introduce themselves, so we'll ask you just to do the same. You're a writer, you're a Catholic, you're a socialist, all those very good things. But how would you describe your deal?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Dean. Really great to be here. Been a long-time fan. I would say I am I'm a Catholic socialist academic. I'm someone who's interested in writing for a popular audience. In part, probably because my academic interests are so wildly not popular. I would like to do something useful for other people, and as fascinating as I find formulaic language and archaic Greek poetry, I don't think that's particularly useful to my fellow human being. So I write about other things instead.
Not useful yet, but just wait. The revolution's right around the corner, and that's all anyone's going to want to know about. Could you say maybe a little bit about your academic interests, just so people have an idea of what you study as your part of your day job?
Yeah, I'm a grad student. I'm on the very last stages of of my dissertation. I in classics. I work primarily on Homer and archaic Greek poetry. I'm very, very interested in words and what they do and what they can't do, which is also, I think, probably part of my theological interest as well, in the things that we can't say.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I can see, I think anyway, some not completely tangential connections to your political interests, so that's great. Like you said, you've written for a popular audience on a number of occasions, some really cool stuff for The Bias, for current affairs in particular, about socialism and Christianity. And you especially engage a lot of conservative Christians who are writing about socialism, which I think is really fun. We'll ask you a lot more about that in a minute. But recently you wrote an article in Current Affairs called Was Jesus a Socialist? That reviews a book by Lewis Reed of the same name, Was Jesus a Socialist? So give us the scoop. Was he a socialist? Was he not a socialist? What do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get annoyed, especially when like people on the right ask that question. Actually, I get annoyed when liberals ask that question too, because I think it's often a way. The question is often a way of not having the conversation about whether Christians ought to be socialists, getting bogged down in historical details, historical fights about the reliability of this or that evidence and what is a socialist and whatever. I mean, I think for me the answer is like trivial. He wasn't. He was living in first century Palestine. We didn't have capitalism. There were no political conditions under which anything we would call socialism could take shape. I don't think it's useful or responsible to talk about Jesus as a socialist or whatever. You lose something, I think, when you try to say that, a particular secular or modern political ideology is, the ideology of Jesus or whatever. Jesus is not a socialist, in part because Jesus is the end. Jesus is God with us. Jesus has inaugurated the kingdom of God, in which we have to attempt to live. Socialism, I think is a way of getting us, of helping us live better, live more in the kingdom of God than we are right now. But to talk about Jesus as I don't like wrestling with the question, because I think it misses the point of what should we be doing.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. I think I'd agree. You mentioned part of your interest in your academic study is just like learning what language does and like what words do. And what do you think these do though? Like it's almost like a meme for liberal Christians to say that Jesus was a socialist or something. What do you think those words do like in conversation? Like why do people bother saying them? Is it just bombastic and like eliciting response? Do people actually believe that? I don't know. Why is that like a thing that people even bother with?
For a lot of liberal Christians, it's I mean, this kind of thing was a lot more popular in like two major eras of American history, the 60s and 70s, in opposition to the Vietnam War, and also in the 2000s, as an expression of, I think a lot of times it ends up being an expression of dissatisfaction with, contempt for, a rejection of the kind of right-wing evangelicalism that has come to exercise so much power in American politics, by saying Jesus was a socialist. You're signaling a rejection of that kind of thing. But I think it's also, you see in there the seeds of the kind of liberal fact-checking brain disease that has sort of dominated liberal the liberal commentariat in the Trump era. It's you're making a statement. You're saying, oh, you got the facts wrong. You read this wrong. But so what? What's the upshot of that supposed to be? I mean, if the upshot of that is supposed to be, convert, repent, change your ways, you don't get people to convert through a fact check. That's not evangelism. That's not preaching. If your purpose is to convert people, you need to engage a little more deeply. You need to meet them somewhere and speak to them, rather than pretending that you're Glenn Keesler at the Washington Post, and awarding the Southern Baptist Convention 3 Pinocchios or whatever.
Yeah, that's like the worst form of liberal apologetics or something. Like not dealing with cool metaphysical arguments or bad metaphysical arguments, but just I don't know, weird political narratives. that makes sense. Well, maybe you could say a little bit more about that, though. So, yeah, there's a liberal way of saying, was Jesus a socialist? And the implicit answer is yes, but it kind of evacuates both maybe what Jesus means and what socialism could mean. But conservatives do this too, and they'll say, no, Jesus wasn't a socialist. Could you maybe say more about what that rhetorical move means? Like, how does Jesus kind of come to be like a stand-in for rejecting socialism because you are for Jesus or something? What's your impression, having looked quite a lot at these conservative construals?
There's a solid genealogy, as you both, I'm sure, are aware, as a lot of listeners to the podcast, I'm sure, are aware. There have been powerful Christian churches, alliances of Christians in opposition to every socialist movement, especially in countries that have a state, that have some kind of established state church. You very often find the clergy and many of sort of the whole sort of power apparatus of institutional religion arrayed against socialist activists. Even very often against socialist activists who are maybe themselves like low-level clergy or are members of their churches. So in one sense, they're redeploying pretty standard right-wing rhetoric, that well Jesus stands for a well-ordered, harmonious society. It's part of it, I think, is this: they want you to buy the idea that a disruption in the social order will somehow inhibit the practice of Christian love. I think that's the hidden premise here, which I think a lot of them are not even thinking of. I think that premise is there, that social upheaval is somehow contrary to or destructive of Christian love. And then some of it is really just pure bad faith. I mean, I think the Lawrence Reed book it was written in enormous intellectual bad faith. I think it was basically deliberately a kind of empty propaganda piece that was not intended to actually be useful to anybody. I think it contrasted in that way with the Matt Walsh book that I had reviewed right before that, which obviously did contain some right-wing bad faith. I mean, I think very few of us write without deploying some kind of bad faith in general. I've certainly been guilty of it sometimes, but I think it was overall, a relatively sincere book that did make some attempt to sort of grapple with some of the contradictions of his position. I don't think he grappled with them particularly well, but that's the kind of thing that I think you can talk to. That it's an opposition that is sincere, but one that is also sort of open to engagement. You find that, I think, more among I think lower level people who are not sort of at the top of the political machinery of the right. Whereas somebody like Reed, who heads up this sort of major libertarian think tank, I mean, I don't doubt that he is a believing Christian who goes to church, but I have serious doubts about sort of the sincerity of that book at all.
Yeah, as you're talking, it's hard for me to imagine Matt Walsh in good faith, but I guess I also don't have the good faith to read him either, which is a great way to ask you. You spend a lot of time engaging conservative Christian writing on politics, and why? Like, why do you find that kind of thing interesting? What makes it worth your time? What's the payoff, or why do you want to kind of explore that stuff?
I didn't actually set out to do that, actually. What really mostly happened was that people sent me books. Nathan Robinson has a habit of buying terrible right-wing books and then announcing that he is sending them to you if you are a person he thinks would review it well. I had written for Current Affairs. I had written a pretty lengthy review of Gene McCarr's Enchantments of Mammon. And so I could say it put me on the radar. I could say that put a target on my back. I think it's probably saying much the same thing. But then I was approached by the Bias to review Trent Horn and Catherine Packeluck's "Can a Catholic Be a Socialist?", which is just a remarkably horrible book. Somehow the book itself is less horrible than Trent Horn himself, who then dogged me on Twitter for 2 weeks, asking if I'd fucked lately. He's a really, really hideous man. But the initial upshot to this, is that people were offering to pay me money to write these reviews, which is an excellent incentive, especially for someone in graduate school. But I do find the project interesting, I think. I've had friends for a number of years, as one sort of has to, living in Southeast Michigan, who share religious convictions with me and don't share political beliefs. And we've had very good friendships and also very productive conversations with one another. So this is sort of something I've been doing sort of part-time, on a very sort of local level for a while. It is worthwhile to engage for those of us who are able to do it, it is worthwhile to engage with people as fellow Christians and to have a serious conversation with them about what that means politically, about how we see our Christian values mandating that we act politically in a certain way. I mean, if somebody is very seriously religious, those conversations can often be very, very productive. I think it's work that's worth doing for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, I think it's possible to do. Two, I think it's good to have a diversity of Christian perspectives in the print media, and to showcase them on the left. And I think because there are plenty of people in this country who are sincerely religious, who are best spoken to and talked to in a religious idiom. And I think the Democratic Party has basically entirely lost the ability to do that. They just don't do it anymore. And I mean, I'm of the opinion that the Democratic Party is in fact incredibly hostile to any kind of sincere religious belief. That if you exhibit that, you're going to be sidelined. The Dems admire somebody like Reverend William Barber from a distance, but they're not letting him in the decision rooms. And that because I think they are suspicious of people who have overriding kind of transcendental value commitments, because those people can't be part of a political machine, and that's a threat to the way the Democrats do business.
Oh, that's really interesting. Maybe we can return to that in just a minute. But before we do that, something you mentioned a minute ago, that you can have productive conversations with other religious people who aren't necessarily socialists or share your particular political beliefs. Maybe we could talk about that for a second. You've done this kind of like reading behind enemy lines, so to speak. You've read these conservative folks, and you're having conversations with your friends who are not necessarily socialists. But like, I don't know, like, how do you make arguments or conversations even about socialism and Christianity stick to folks who aren't fellow socialists, aren't fellow believers in that type of Christianity? Like, some people are gonna just be like obstinate and not listen to you no matter what you say. But like, I don't know, what strategies have worked for having those kinds of productive discussions? I think like as I don't know if this is true for everybody, but at least in my own life, as I see like some friends and family members become like more and more like radicalized by like right wing forces, this is a conversation and a thing that I'm very interested in. Like, how do we talk to these folks that share our religion but not our politics?
You have to start. You have to start with the gospel. If you're starting, and it's very clear, I think that you're going to have a primarily political discussion with a primarily political agenda. And I don't think those are bad discussions to have, but I think that some people are very averse to them, and that as a prudential matter, in terms of what a successful strategy, that's not perhaps the way to start. Um, I mean, I've started with the things that we value in common, and what does it mean to love your neighbor? I mean, what really are the demands that Christ lays on us, because they're very, very severe. Um, I think pretty much everybody agrees on that. If you go through and you take the commands and the commandments of Christ seriously, you you don't have wiggle room here. You have to live for other people, because that is how we train ourselves in love. I mean, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God, and the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. As it turns out, these are unbelievably difficult things to do, and we can't do them off the bat. But thankfully, we have been given much more attainable disciplines. We've been told to feed the hungry, to water the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to ransom the captive. And because those are things that train us and are stepping stones to being able to love people the way that we should. And I think if you start from there, from the things, what are we commanded to do and why? I think, in my experience, I have gotten a lot further than I think I've gotten a lot further than I at first expected. I'm not going to say I've been 100% successful every time. I have plenty of friends who are who are not on who are not looking to storm the Winter Palace. I know that I successfully convinced a number of people that if you are that as conservative Christians who valued sort of strong families and local community, they had no choice but to vote in the Democratic primary for Bernie Sanders. I was like, look, if you want people to have local community ties, if you want people to have the families they want to have, if you want to see a reduction in the number of abortions, if that's your thing, you should vote. You should vote for the socialist guy, because all of that is I mean, we have the numbers. Those things would all happen under a social democratic presidency like Bernie Sanders. And I mean, I don't know what they're going to do in the general, but I made that leap, at least for some people, and I think that was that's at least some kind of success. I'm not sure how you do it in in relationships where you don't already have sort of a pre-existing relationship with someone, I think that's much harder. I mean, which is, my way of doing that is by writing, and it's not going to land with everybody. As you said, Matt, it's I mean, some people are just not interested in hearing it, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. Some people maybe are just not reading at the right time. I don't know. We can never know why, but I think the most important thing is you just keep trying to have these conversations and try to make it clear that you're talking in good faith. And if they want to answer that, and if they want to have a conversation in good faith, then maybe you can get somewhere. Maybe you won't, but I've had enough good ones that I think it's a worthwhile thing for me to try to do. Both in person and sort of remotely in my writing.
Yeah, I think that's helpful and pretty illuminating to that block for like right wing folks. If you don't mind, if we go back to one thing you said a while back, now kind of the same question but from a different angle. You kind of mentioned there's this sort of block within the Democratic Party about like people with transcendental values, or people who believe in like who ultimately believe in religion above like the program of the Democratic Party or something. Yeah, like what do you think is going on with that type of block, right? Like, yeah, on the one hand, there's a right wing block where they don't want to hear about socialist politics, and you have to find ways to break through that. But like, what's going on from the other direction from liberals?
I think in the case of like liberal Dems, I think it's just sort of it's this idea of I mean, I think it's political pragmatism, because the party is dedicated to preserving the jobs and the power of very, very long established Democratic politicians, and it's dedicated to providing a steady stream of consulting jobs for the dumbest people in the Ivy League, and just the absolute dregs of the Ivies. Having people who are not sort of with the program, who are not willing to sort of pull back when the party says to pull back, who are actually determined to get something done, who have very, very serious moral commitments, is a huge thorn in their side. I mean, you see it in the way that the way that they treat, the way they treat young Democratic politicians whose sort of calling card is a very serious moral commitment. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people like Ilhan Omar, people like Rashida Tlaib, one of whom is Catholic, two of whom are Muslims. All three are marked by having very, very serious moral commitments wherever those commitments are coming from, and who are not willing to compromise on moral questions. And I think that's it's a pain for a party that is built largely around a kind of feigned helplessness. It's no threat to Chuck Schumer's and Nancy Pelosi's jobs if they're a minority party, if they can't get anything done. It is a huge threat to their jobs if they become a majority party, and then suddenly people expect them to get things done. Because if they don't do those things, then they might be voted out. Yeah, I think that dislike for I think for very seriously religious people is symptomatic of this sort of larger thing, of this larger problem the Democratic Party has with people who have serious moral commitments that they're not willing to back down from.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. People talk about the religious left, the Christian left, whatever, constantly, and we're always, journalists are always trying to describe what it looks like and how it works. But I guess like what's really interesting about what you're saying here is that those are fine questions, and like we should investigate that or whatever. But like the Democratic Party has already inoculated itself against that type of moral commitment. So in the end, like the power analysis is incomplete without that sort of bit. It's pretty interesting.
Ultimately, I think that the Dems are making the same calculus as the Republicans, but because of the situation on the ground with their voters, they had to make a different decision. The Republicans have dealt with the problem of transcendent values by basically cultivating a form of American Christianity whose tenets are whatever happens to be the platform of the Republican Party. A form of American evangelicalism that ultimately mutates into whatever the Republican Party needs it to be. That's one way of solving that problem. The Dems can't do that. Their base is too diverse in terms of class, is too diverse in terms of race, is too diverse in terms of religious upbringing. They can't cultivate that kind of monolith. That they can't cultivate a religious institutional monolith that's going to take its platform straight from them. So the other way to do that is to basically just do your best to make sure that the people who win power in your party are as gutless and reptilian as possible. I think they would love to be able to do what the Republicans did, but they can't. The demographics just don't allow for it. So they're going to do the next best thing and just shut out anybody who has moral commitments that would interfere with their taking marching orders from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you're talking about it, I'm kind of I'm really curious about sort of the idea of on the one hand a moral commitment as you're talking about it, and how that relates to being a person who says they're religious or publicly religious, and maybe where those things do and don't come up. I kind of want to talk about it, but I also want to avoid the risk of becoming too wonky on this podcast, which we try extremely hard not to be. And so I think I'm going to listen to my inner communist and try to stop speculating about the Democrats, and instead ask you about how socialism is, more than ideas, which you're very, very gifted at explaining, and we're really grateful for it. But we're also very happy to have you here to talk to us a bit about what's been happening on the ground, specifically at the University of Michigan. As we said in the introduction, and as you have been posting and tweeting and writing about, there was a huge, very important and very exciting and surprising strike that happened at the university recently. Graduate students went on strike out of concern over the university's reopening plan and campus safety, and then all kinds of other things happened after that. So we're really happy that you're here to tell us a little bit about that, being a person who's involved at the University of Michigan as a graduate student in your own kind of way. So maybe we could start out and ask you to just tell us a little bit about your relationship to the strike, and then we can ask you a little bit more about the strike itself.
I supported the strike. I participated in the strike by withholding my academic labor. I am not someone who was directly affected by it because I'm on my last term, so I'm on fellowship for this term. The primary people who were withdrawing their labor were the graduate student instructors, what a lot of universities call TAs, but in Michigan they're called graduate student instructors, and then also the GSSAs, and I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but they're graduate students who have administrative jobs. They are also covered by the union contract. The University of Michigan has been unionized since 1974. We organized with the American Federation of Teachers. I have been a dues-paying member of the union for a long time. I was my department shop steward earlier in my graduate career. I'm a huge believer in it, and so I was very happy to support the strike and to go out on the picket lines. I had some investment in it as well because I was supposed to defend my dissertation in mid-July. I was supposed to be done. Then in March, all the shutdowns happened. The university library is totally shut down, and I had no more access to books. My committee and I were in kind of a holding pattern. We waited for news from the university about what this would mean for people like in my situation. They had taken some measures to give relief to people who were supposed to defend in the spring. We basically got nothing. We were a small enough minority, the people who were defending in the summer, that they didn't really feel obliged to do anything to help us out. I'm very fortunate to have an extremely supportive department. They moved some mountains and found some money for me, which is why I'm able to finish this term, because I was also at the end of my funding rope. don't think anyone should have to go through that. One of the planks of that strike that meant a whole lot to me was a universal funding extension for all the currently enrolled graduate students who had their research disrupted or the degree progress disrupted in one way or another by this long shutdown. I don't think people should have to rely on the charity of their departments or on their departments, having been good money managers and having some spare cash lying around. I'm very glad mine did. I'm very glad that they support me. I don't think, they shouldn't have had to. They shouldn't have had to dig around in their own money to support one of their students, because this is a university-wide problem. And then on top of that, I have a lot of friends in the Ann Arbor community who either have school-aged children or who work in the public schools. And the Ann Arbor public schools, this is maybe not widely known, the Ann Arbor public schools very much wanted to go at least partway in person for their instruction this fall, and had the facilities to carry that out, but in a pretty safe way. But the university's reopening, at the school board judged that the university's reopening plan was so irresponsible that they could not in good conscience open the school. A lot of kids in the Ann Arbor public schools have parents who are in some way associated with the university, their faculty or their staff, or maybe they work in the medical school, and the way the university's reopening plan was playing out, I mean, those kids would have been exposed, probably have been exposed. And then if they'd gone to school, then they would have exposed other kids as well, and it would have been really disastrous. So this was a strike for graduate students, for the safety of the Ann Arbor community, and I mean, for a safe response more broadly, because one of the things that I'm sort of most proud of is the way that our strike tied together its anti-policing demands with a safe pandemic response. And I think that was very much the right thing to do. It just made complete sense. If you're relying, part of the university's response was to increase university police presence on campus. And University of Michigan Department of Public Safety are, they have their police officers. They have full arresting authority. They carry firearms. Particularly after the events of this past spring and summer, you cannot in good faith make the argument that putting more armed police on campus makes Black and brown community members safer. It doesn't. It's completely insane to even think that. And so that was part of our platform, because we said that everyone deserves a safe campus, and that safety, you cannot claim to be creating a safe campus if you are mortgaging the safety of some people, of Black and brown people, in order to buy the illusion of safety for white people.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It was cool to see how that developed alongside the strike. The strikers rolled all of these community demands into what they were protesting, and I think it ended up being very powerful. I mean, at least the community response definitely attests to the power of the strike. Something that really sticks out to me about the strike that is probably worth talking about a little bit is that it was an illegal strike. And I think that is, I mean, it kind of gets buried in the story a little bit, but like what was going on there? Like, why was it illegal? How did that, the legality aspect play into the larger struggle?
It was an illegal strike for multiple reasons. One is that public employees in the state of Michigan are not allowed to strike. That's just against the law. But it was also a violation of our contract. Like many labor contracts, we have a no strike clause for the duration of the contract. And we just signed this latest contract this past spring. So it's a fresh contract. This is not the first illegal strike action that we have voted for. A little more than 3 years ago, we were getting ready. We were in negotiations. The contract is not up until the beginning of May. And the school year always ends at the end of April. So any strike during the school year is going to be an illegal strike. But we were reaching a stalemate in negotiations, and the union authorized a strike. We ended up not having to call it because that authorization got us the kind of movement we wanted at the bargaining table. We're not strangers to calling illegal strike actions. This is the first actual strike action we've had in a number of years where we actually had to go through with it. It definitely figured into into the planning. I was not intimately involved with the planning myself. I know some people who were, and what they've told me, and also from our union meetings. It was not something we were afraid of at first because the court systems move very slowly. Because the administration's, even during an illegal strike action, if it's a large strike, it's easiest for them if they can end the strike without going to a court. They don't have to pay legal fees. They don't have to endure the press of going to court. Normally, before when a strike is declared, the university comes with an offer. That didn't happen this time. They did not have an offer package ready for us on the night before the strike was to begin, and so we went in for it. Day after Labor Day was when it started. As the strike drew on, a couple of days later, they did give us an offer package. We rejected it. We ended up rejecting it. It was not enough movement on the things we wanted, and that was when the stakes started to get real, because part of the deal that we were offered obviously was a non-retaliation clause. There'd be no retaliation against the union. There'd be no retaliation against any individual members. And if your strike is illegal, they can retaliate against you. The law is on their side, and you're not gonna win those court cases. We rejected it. We had some momentum building. That was also the day that the campus RAs started striking. That was really, really powerful. I had been praying to St. Joseph the Worker about this strike, and then the morning after I did, I find out that the RAs are striking, and I thought that was a miracle. It was really remarkable. And then a couple of days later, the dining hall workers staged a work slowdown and slowed the dining halls to a crawl. And we got we had support from local trade unions as well. That was a really key part of our power. Why we were able to keep the heat on the university was because we were able to halt construction projects. We were able to halt deliveries because the trade unions respected our picket lines. That made it less scary for us. It started to get scary when the university actually went to court. They filed for an injunction, and we knew they were going to get it. And that carried with it the threat that if they got that injunction, we kept striking, they could get damages. They could, and that would have financially bankrupted our union. And so that did end up figuring into our decision about whether to take the offer or not. A lot of people felt, I agree with them, that we didn't take the offer because it was good. We got some really important things. We got some much better support for graduate students who are parents. We got a permanent increase in resources for international students. That's incredibly important, and the benefits of those are going to be felt by a lot of people. We got some meetings with the regents and some seats on like upcoming university committees. And I'm very much a cynic about committees. Committees are where you send a good idea to die in a university, but to get even a tiny bit of movement like that on when we were giving them really straightforward, really radical anti-policing demands was really, really remarkable. So I don't want to downplay what the hard work of all of our organizers and all of our members got us. But the deal was not great. And if we hadn't been under threat, if the union hadn't been under threat, I think there's a very good chance we would not have taken that deal.
Well, the struggle continues as always, I guess. But you've certainly put a lot on the table. I appreciate that you helped us figure out how it started, built some momentum, and where it ended up. It's always good to kind of get like an anatomy picture of strikes and have an idea of like how these things really work, right, beyond all that we say in articles or whatever. I think though, if I could end this conversation kind of coming back to some of the things we started with. Strikes, they mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It's where people get access to sudden political education and transformation, whether they like it or not. You learn quite a lot in the middle of those kinds of events. And, as a Christian socialist reflecting on this yourself, I'm curious about what that strike means to you. And especially I'm thinking in terms of things you've already said about how it's difficult in today's political landscape in terms of the two major parties to be a person of conviction, a person of moral or religious commitment, and find a place there. But strikes, of course, are also those kind of wild events that happen outside of, polite jurisprudence or whatever. So yeah, thinking about what you've sort of been part of, in that capacity and the solidarity you've witnessed, et cetera, praying to St. Joseph and so on. How are you sort of interpreting those events for you?
I view the strike, very much as someone who's been a teacher, who's been an educator. I don't remember where I read this. I think somebody posted it on Facebook, and they had gotten it from somewhere. I think it came from one of the teacher strikes from last year. Just because teachers are striking doesn't mean they're not teaching. And I think that was very true, and I saw it myself. Graduate student strikes are interesting because undergraduates are much closer often to their graduate instructors than they are to their professors. I mean, they see us, not incorrectly, I think, as occupying a kind of intermediate place. And we do. We're teachers, but we're also fellow students. We have a lot of the same concerns that they do. We, in sort of the larger structure of campus, we can find ourselves in some of the same, like campus organizations. I'm part of a men's choir on campus that has a fair number of graduate members, but that's mostly undergraduates. The group is all very close to one another, and I got to see sort of firsthand that this strike really was a kind of education for people. It was a way of showing, in really concrete terms, both what solidarity means, what it means to practice solidarity in a meaningful and deliberate way, and what's at stake. Even undergraduates, from very kind of conservative backgrounds. I saw, looking at the geo demands and saying, a lot of these, I really see what's going on. Many of them are obviously a lot more speculative about the anti-policing demands, but a lot more receptive to them, I think, than they would have been in the past. They saw what was going on in the news. They saw the deaths of George Floyd. They saw they heard about the death of Breonna Taylor. They're raised in a conservative setting, but that doesn't mean that they don't have, a well-developed moral sense. And I think they realized this was wrong, and so they were open even to that, I think. And they know that like the graduate students make just absolute shit wages, and that they most of them think that they deserve to be paid more because Ann Arbor is a very expensive place to live, and because their instructors work very hard for them. I think it was a really valuable educational experience for a lot of people. I hope it'll be a meaningful one. I think those incredibly brave resident advisors who were striking without a union, who were striking from a job in which their pay is their housing. The university threatened to kick them out of their housing. Absolutely hideous, unthinkable kind of threats to give to these people. But because a lot of RAs take the job because their families don't have a lot of financial resources, or because they are, because they're a marginalized identity and they might not feel welcome at home. There's poor kids and a lot of queer kids who take jobs as RAs. To threaten a group of workers that is disproportionately comprised of vulnerable people is so. It's satanic. It is absolutely diabolical in the most literal sense of the word. And I think a lot of people got to see that. They got the relation between labor and capital unmasked for them. They got to see, up close, what the agenda of the high priests of Mammon really is. And they found it really repulsive. And I hope that they're going to take that with them. So in that sense, I think I believe and I hope that it was a kind of practical catechism for people on what it really means to live and act on behalf of other people, and what the stakes of that action really are.
Well, I think that's a really profound note to end on. A good way to wrap up a conversation about, not only just strikes and whatever, the challenges thereof, but also what it means to have a certain commitment, and what it means to maybe be put in an environment that allows you to get those kinds of commitments. So thanks. It's great to have a window into that. Also, it's great to have you on the show, Dan. Like we said earlier, it's been really fun to follow you on Twitter and follow some of your writing and just see what you're up to. As we close, I just want to give you a chance to plug anything that you might want to, or if people wanted to find your work and your writing, how might they do that?
If you want to find my all my published writing so far is at either Current Affairs or at the Bias, at the Institute for Christian Socialism. If you Google me and search out, if you hate yourself enough to follow me on Twitter, I'm sorry. Really want that kind of poison in your brain? You can follow me on Twitter. I assume you can you guys can put my handle in the description. And then if you want to read any of my other writing. If you want to read my dissertation, don't.
That's a very evergreen tweet.
Cool, Dan. Thanks so much.
Yeah, this has been a pleasure. Thank you both.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, and if you want to hear especially more about all these big leftist Halloween mascots, you can do it at the Patreon, at patreon.com/themagnificast. There you'll find some early episodes. You'll find this other podcast that we do called the Magnificast Lock-In, and a good group of folks who are there. So check that out for sure. We've got a new sticker there. If you donate at the $10 or $11 amount for 3 months, you'll get a great sticker designed by Ryan Cagle. It's a Camilla Torres sticker. Man, it looks so cool. I can't wait to get one myself. That's very neat. So check that out as well. Don't forget to find Dan. You can find his Twitter handle in our show notes, and you can also find his writing at Current Affairs and The Bias. Our music is by Amoria Armstrong, and our outro is by the Illogical Spoon. It never does get easier to say, does it? We'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.